Alright, hi. Now, where I last left off with my last video on the topic of what is smart, I was talking about teacher training programs, and I was about to talk about Howard Gardner. Now, Howard Gardner came up with the theory of multiple intelligences, and the idea there is that intelligence is multiple. You have logical, mathematical intelligence, spatial intelligence. You have, I think, artistic intelligence. You have, I think there's like an athletic component there. So you have this different types of intelligences. And I was surprised at how new this whole idea is. Howard Gardner only came out with his book Frames of Mind in the early 80s. And I was surprised that it's not older than that, because even before I knew of Howard Gardner, I kind of thought that intelligence might possibly be multiple. I did think about that. I remember thinking about it. And then I found out about Howard Gardner and, heard what he had to say. So, that's interesting, the idea that intelligence could be multiple. Another factor in intelligence, when you talk about what smart is, would be things like creativity, for example. I mean, does creativity play a role in what intelligence is? Like having an original idea, like someone who composes a really good piece of music, or someone who paints a really good painting. Sometimes those people will be referred to as geniuses, or really smart. So maybe they did something very innovative, who knows? But would that be considered intelligence? I certainly think you could call that intelligence, but it's an interesting thing to think about. I know there's an individual on YouTube who will often talk about how intelligence is not regurgitation. In other words, what he's kind of saying is he felt that people a lot of times will regurgitate information and then they'll think they're smart because of it. In fact, I think this guy even has a t-shirt that says intelligence is not regurgitation. But, I guess, I don't know, if you get a lot of information and you kind of put your own spin on the information, either by writing about it or talking about it, maybe it could be seen as intelligence. I mean, that's another interesting thing to take into consideration. I definitely think so. And I could remember, and I was thinking about this when my last video went off. I was thinking about how I remember, or, a friend of mine in school was, would get good grades. And I remember one time after class, we had just had a test, or we'd just gotten a test back, and he said that he got an A and he didn't even study for the test, right? I mean, everyone's probably known people like this. And I asked him, how did you get a good grade on the test without even studying for it? And, I was hoping for some kind of complex methodology or some kind of strategy. Instead, he just said, well, because I'm smart. And that was the first time I got to thinking about what smart is, and kind of what led me to even make this video. Was, that statement. Then I began thinking immediately afterwards, well, what is smart? Now, what I think happened in his situation is that, the teacher was giving out information and talking and putting things on the board, and he just memorized it really well, and then he was able to put it down on the test sheet. And he didn't need to study for that because he had a good memory. And that leads to another thing, is memory play a role in intelligence? Does memory play a role in what smart is? It's another interesting thing right there. Some people would say yes, some people would say no. I definitely think, you have to remember the information, so I certainly would think that it would definitely play a role in what smart is. I certainly would think that there's a memory factor involved. But another thing that I want to talk about would be attention and focus. And there's a quote here that says, "A wealth of info creates a poverty of attention." A wealth of info creates a poverty of of attention. I don't know who came up with that, but that is kind of interesting. Kind of, shows that, have a lot of information. People might not have good attention spans. And that's another thing, is attention and focus. Does that play a role in intelligence? Some people say it does. These days you have a lot of kids with attention deficit disorders. And what tends to happen to them is they tend to be given prescription drugs for this. Now, could this all be taken care of and handled if these kids would just learn attention, or they'd just learn focus? And you could learn attention and focus just by doing some simple meditation exercises. These kids aren't being given that. Instead, they're just given drugs. Now, I know this is kind of getting into sort of a controversial area, but, it is interesting to think about the fact that, maybe people could be rehabilitated by not always a substance, but by a process, maybe. A process of teaching somebody focus and attention could give the person a much greater attention span and help them focus more. Another thing in this is emotion. So a lot of times emotion could impede one's ability to learn. There's no doubt about that. For example, say like maybe yesterday you got into a conversation with somebody and you said something that might have been kind of weird, and now you kind of regret it, and that thing is just in your mind, and you're trying to learn something or figure something out, and it's just getting in the way. Well, learning how to, suppress those kinds of emotions, is important. Learning how to, shoot those kinds of thoughts down is, definitely something that's important to do. And being able to do it well will allow you to learn more because you'll be more focused. You won't have those thoughts impacting your mind as much. So it's another interesting idea. Yeah, so, another thing I was thinking about as, my last video went off was this. Now, imagine someone from the 1980s, a kid from the 1980s who's considered to be gifted. That kid's considered to be gifted. He's in the gifted program. Now, imagine a kid today who's not gifted, but inundated with a ton of information and knowledge and ideas, due to technology and, due to the Flynn effect, like I said. Who would be smarter? That's interesting. That's an interesting thing to contemplate and to talk about, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. But certainly, it is an interesting thing to ponder upon. But, so another thing that I do want to talk about is articulation. Now, articulation, I think, is the thing that people use to judge people's intelligence, right? Now, Howard Gardner would say it's the spatial mathematical type intelligence that people use to judge one's intellect. But others have said articulation. That, you could kind of think of articulation as the muscles of intelligence, right? Because people will judge a person's strength based on how muscular they look, right? People will see a muscular person and they'll assume that that person is strong. Sometimes those people are strong, sometimes they're not. It's the same thing with intelligence. Sometimes a person who's not very articulate could be very intelligent. In fact, when George W. Bush was president, a lot of, Bush supporters would usually say, okay, he's not an articulate guy, he doesn't give a good speech, but he has a very keen business intellect, and he's going to run the government like a business, which is what should be done. That's what would often be said by Bush supporters during the Bush administration, during the George W. Bush administration. So, another thing is, maybe some people are really articulate, but they may not be all that intelligent, right? Like the people on Fox News. I had to get that out there. I had to get that out there. No disrespect to the people on Fox News. But yeah, so, moving right along, it's just definitely, interesting things to kind of talk about and to kind of take into consideration, and especially when you're talking about intelligence. But, yeah, so, that's all I have to say in this video. And, if you did watch this video, I definitely thank you for watching, because at this day and age, there's a lot of other things you could be watching, right? There's a lot of other YouTube videos. There's a lot of things on TV you could be watching. So if you did watch my video, as always, I thank you for watching.